Good evening once again. We're here on Gelvin Valley. Going to continue baling, trying to get all this done. I'm kind of pleased at how quickly this is going. I guess the last time that I did all that baling, I wasn't making these videos. So maybe all this talking and ranting and raving is doing me a little good. At least making the time pass. Probably isn't making a pass for you. Maybe it's just a bunch of extra racket in your ears when you prefer to hear just a tractor. But welcome aboard. Thanks for stopping by and taking some time to visit good old Gelvin Valley. I'm still just loving this map. It's just beautiful. Even for Farm Sim 15. I was just talking to a friend here the other day, and this was Reefy 1952. I know I've mentioned him on a previous video. He's a wonderful storyteller, lives in the UK. I've enjoyed many of his videos because I enjoy stories, but I was in contact with him, and he mentioned, oh, I got that little OCD, I gotta go get this. He mentioned he was opening up a map again that he was going to play. It was for Farm Sim 17. So, see, I'm not the only dinosaur that goes back to previous versions of the game to enjoy them. And I can't remember if this is something I described previously, but for me in the farming game, when it comes to mods, it's all about the map. I've never made a map. I think I'd love to make a map someday. I think that'd be a lot of fun. I've just never been able to sit down and do it. I've made lots of modifications to other people's maps. Even a few on this map here, little cosmetic things here and there. Nothing major. Mainly to remove collisions on a few fence posts because I keep crashing into them or I can't fit the equipment through the gate. But other than that, I've pretty well left it alone. But it's the environment, that we're all farming in, and having a special place. I mean, this is the actual land, the place you farm and everything. I can't imagine, and I realize everybody's different. I can't imagine caring more for, say, oh, I don't know, there'd be people back then that were clamoring for John Deere tractors, for example. And at that time, Giants didn't put them into the game. So if you wanted a John Deere tractor, you had to look for a mod. Whoop. I almost think that car caught air as it came over this grate. But some people do. As they look at a game like this, they wanted the particular brand of tractor or whatever that suited them. But for me, it's always been about the map. So therefore, when you got a beautiful map, I don't care what version it is, for me it's not that hard to go back to it. Regardless of what version it is, you got to do a little bit to kind of refamiliarize yourself with some of the controls of the game, which changed a little bit over time. For example, I think in here, when you dump a trailer, you hit the key on the keyboard, you hit Q. Well, I think we all know that Q also is the disconnect uh, button. So in later versions of the game, I think you started to hit I to tip trailers and whatnot. So some of it's just relearning some of those nuances. But if it's a good looking map, and this one is, shoot, I don't care if this is Farm Sim 09, I would come back to it. And there are other things, obviously, between the versions that change over time, where the textures improve, the lighting, just all sorts of things that improve. But in general, if you've got a well-made map, I don't care what version it is, I'll do it again. Like I think for in FS09, for example, the straw didn't look nearly this good, and I think it's something that only started to improve. Come on, you can pull this hill. I think you can. I think you can. Now we're already up to Farm Sim 22. They even skipped a year so we all could enjoy Farm Sim 19 a little bit longer. Excuse me there. I had to mute myself to have a cough and get a drink. Like I say, I probably shouldn't be doing this when I have a cold, but I'm having fun, so that's that. I probably sound like a smoked a pack of camels for all I know. It's all right. I can't even remember if I've explained my playing history in here before. Not that anybody cares, but I think probably everybody has some kind of a story as to how they found the game or just how they came upon it. Because there's still people you run into out there they have no clue, and they might love a game like this. If they have some connection to the farm or what have you, they just don't know that it exists. Although it'd be pretty hard to say that now. Um, it's pretty when you hear that they is it 115 million people that have this game? I don't know what's that right. Some astronomical number of people, that play it and mod for it and all that jazz. So I mean, it's pretty ubiquitous anymore as the premier farming game. But it started, with Farm Sim '08, and that's the only one of the franchise that I don't have. I think it was pretty basic. Although I think if you look it up on YouTube, you could find mods. There still was modding then. Looked quite a bit different than it did now. The graphics weren't nearly as good as they are now. But that's the only one that I don't have. I have Farm Sim '09. That was the first one that I purchased, and I have every version since. And most of the DLCs and all that stuff too. I just kind of collected it as we go. But before Farming Simulator, when I'm getting to be an older guy, growing up at home, I look back and think about this. Maybe some people, if they're from America, maybe they recognize it. But has anybody ever heard of the board game, the farming game? It's just a simple board game where you pretend you're a farmer, you buy fields, you incur debt, you buy machinery, you grow crops, and it's all random. You got just a standard board you go around with, roll the dice, and you do what you do, and you pretend you're a farmer, and it's just a game. It's pretty hard to go through. It's kind of like this game here. Ultimately, you're going to come out of the woods. Although, don't look at my cast position. Maybe you still kind of wonder about me, but folks will eventually get out of this and make money and not have money issues. But back in the day, I mean, I remember a day when we just didn't just have computers at our beck and call. And once we did start getting computers, they were nothing like this. They were the old monochrome screens or green. I don't even know what the terminology is, a CRT, or whatever that is, a monitor. It was not color, it wasn't any of this. And there was no farm type program. I mean, even if it would have been in text, I probably would have loved it because I've always searched for and looked for farming type games, if you will. But for the longest time, I still remember in our family we got the farming game at home, and I played the living daylights out of that game. And when I couldn't find anybody to play it with me, I didn't care. I played it all by myself. Oh, look at that! It's kind of sitting up in the air. Yeah. It's all because of that little script we put in, by the way. Yeah, they're slowly coming down. But I would just play over and over and over, so much so that my mom would come up. A lot of times I did in my room at home, and she would chase me out and say, "You need to get out of here and go outside or do some other things, interact with some people." And I was just enthralled with the business of farming and enjoyed every minute of it. even playing just by myself and the challenge of having a farm. I even started making tougher rules. It's pretty easy in the farming game to turn a buck. And so I started making it tougher. I'd always heard farmers, talk in real life that, farming was not an easy occupation. It was a lot tougher than what people thought. So I started just making it tougher, charging myself more money. Like for example, the game would have a card that you would pull and it'd say you got to pay interest of, you know, 10% on your loan or something. That game was made back in the day when interest rates were much higher. So it had a card, and if that card was pulled, you had to pay interest. Well, I said, but don't the banks charge interest? They don't wait for you to pull a card in real life. If you have debt, you are always going to pay interest on it. And so I started charging myself all the more. And I was doing this. I learned a ton. And my mom may think I fried my brain or should have been interacting with people, but I think I was learning business. I started learning about insurance and what that meant, and the concept of paying a premium, and just all kinds of different costs that went into a farm, and some of which were fixed and some that varied depending on what you put in. I invented new crops. I made my own farming game board. I made a farming game specific to grass seed, made up a whole new one. Oh, I drove my mom nuts. Somewhere down the line, she got a hold of a whole bunch of large paper that was in rolls. It was kind of like butcher paper, only it wasn't. It was just massive rolls of paper, and I'd cut off a huge sheet, and I would turn it into a huge game board, that I would play on then for my grass seed farm or whatever. Uh, and then in later years, as I learned Microsoft Excel, I converted it over to Excel, and I continued to play it. And now I had these macros where, I mean, that's as close as I had to a computer game to play the farming game just by running some macros I had written into Excel. So, yeah, I guess I was pretty stuck in the head with it. Maybe obsessed is another word, I don't know. But I'd like to think I was learning a ton kind of as we went, just through a game. Learning lots of other things that would be of use later, or even in my career, especially like working with Excel and that kind of thing. There were some other games I recall making too. At one point, I was interested in trucking and transportation, so I made a game for trucking and trying to get things to their destination on time. Um, I made another farming game on berries. The area where I live, we have a lot of berries that are grown: blueberries, blackberries, loganberries, boysenberries, strawberries, you name it. Gooseberries, we got them here. Um, so I made up a game solely for berry farming. And that has its own whole contingent of farming. Maybe someday, as the Farming Simulator series continues developing, I think in Farm Sim 22, don't we now have, and I apologize, I haven't played 22 that much, but don't we have a grape harvester? I kind of think we do. So maybe with a little more time going by, eventually we'll have berries, where you can plant some blueberries and harvest it using a machine that they have commercially. And there's all kinds of variety of ag kind of in our area that I would love to see in the game. So that's kind of what I did to amuse myself as a kid, which, I would have loved to have a game like this. Oh, I would have loved it. At some point was it high school? I can't remember when it was, when this game called Sim Farm came out. Maybe some people listening remember Sim Farm. And it wasn't a 3D game like this. It was set up similar to, I think, Sim City. I never really played Sim City, so I really don't know how it worked. I only played Sim Farm. And brother, let me tell you, I put in a lot of hours on it. I still have it somewhere on my computer here. I'm sure I can find it. Maybe. Maybe it's on the one at, maybe it's in my office archives. Don't know. But it kind of was a top-down look at at your farm, and you had these fields. I can't remember if you had to buy the fields or just how that worked. But in some ways, it was the same kind of a deal. You could buy tractors, harvesters. You could plant all these different crops, raise them, earn money, etc. Deal with the weather. All of that in kind of a top-down environment. The graphics, well, I mean, they were okay with the standard of the day, but today, I mean, they would look just hideous compared even to Farm Sim 15 here. But in many ways, still, I will say that game is ahead of the Farming Simulator franchise in a number of areas, just in concepts. Well, for example, just the variety of crops. This game was made once, I think. I don't know, it was updated. And when Farming Sim came on the scene, what could you grow? You could grow wheat. I think in the very first game, all you could grow was wheat. Then they added barley and canola. Uh, I can't remember an O9. Did they have corn there? I mean, you could add your own crops and everything. I'm talking with what came with the stock game. So, and then slowly over time, they added the root crops. I think each time they add a little bit more. But when I think of the variety that was in Sim Farm back in the day, it still beats the base game of Farming Simulator. They had, you could grow tomatoes, you could grow a orange orchard, you could grow apples, you could grow wheat, onions. I mean, you had just tons of different things that you could grow. We don't even have the option to. And I realize it was a totally different. Maybe it was easier to add those things, there would be to like today's game. I don't know. What do I know? I'm not a programmer. I'm just observing it had more options. But it wasn't just in crops alone. Where I would say where it wasn't near as good, of course, is in variety of machinery. Well, I think you had the option of one tractor, one type of combine. But I think, as everybody here knows, there are certain crops that can only be harvested by hand. So for example, like I mentioned, orange orchard. When you planted one of those in Sim Farm, you would literally see, when it came harvest time, your field full of people working around, picking all the oranges and whatever. Well, and I don't know how you would do this in Farming Simulator, but the reality is sometimes there are some labor-intensive crops out there that are handled almost entirely by hand. So that was an option that they had. Oh, let's see. Even for spraying, I mean, they had different. For the longest time, the Farming Sim franchise didn't have weeds in it, didn't have pesticides, fungicides. Sim Farm had all that. When bugs attacked your field, you had a spray to get rid of them. Another thing they had that Farming Sim didn't have was water management. You depended on the rain or irrigation to water your crops. Well, we still don't have any of that, to my knowledge, in Farming Sim. And if you add too much water, it'd flood out, and too much, of course, would harm the crop. Farming or Sim Farm had natural disasters. There could be a tornado that would come through that would just decimate your fields. There would be freezes, there would be excessive heat, flooding, wind, all these natural disasters, and we don't have a single one in Farming Simulator. And maybe justifiably so. Who knows how hard it would be? Like, you look out across this field, how would you create a tornado to come across the field and deal with all these trees and objects? It tries a nightmare Whereas in an old game like that, it might have been pretty easy to simulate that, for all I know. All I'm saying is it had the concept that we just don't have it here. What we have here is a lot better graphical interface. Uh, the game, a sim or a farm, also had a financial section of it. Where you could look at a balance sheet, your P&L. I say P&L, that's your income statement. Um, we kind of have that in farming sim, right? Where we can see kind of the basics. Like if I go here, yeah, that doesn't show a balance sheet, but it shows your earnings for the day at least. That's maybe improved a little bit over time. I don't remember. But in Sim Farm, you even had a balance sheet. In terms of what you owned and what you owed, bank loan on there and all that. And, and oh yeah, don't forget the futures market. It just had it all built in there. Farmers today, especially if you grow one of the major commodities, by major commodity I mean something like corn, wheat, soybeans, oats, that kind of thing. I think even if you raise certain cattle or hogs, there's futures markets where the farmer can hedge his risk and or play the market. Take risk. I mean, by all means, some of them speculate. Well, in Sim Farm, they had the kind of a futures market in there. You could choose to sell your crop at today's price, and it would remember that so that when you harvested, it would give you that price. And so, obviously, if you noticed the prices were way higher than they normally were, well, the player had a choice that you could sell, that you could sell high. Then, if they declined, by the time you reached harvest, well, then obviously you made a good deal. Oh, what else did they have? I think they had a plane that you could fly and spray your fields. That came with a base game, Giants. You need to up your game. I know there's mods out there now available where you can do that. Um, I kind of prefer the conventional way, but it's kind of fun to hop in a plane and spray the field if you want to. Those guys are crazy. We still have some of them in our area too, and I don't know how they do it around all the hills and obstacles, whether telephone pole or tree. We used to have a one growing up that, inevitably they would do it early in the morning. Earlier the better, when it was wind still. They could drop the chemical out of the plane on the field and it wouldn't blow away. So, I'd wake up in the morning as a kid, 4:30, 5 in the morning, whenever it was, and it seemed like that miserable plane was just turning around over the top of our house. You just hear it buzz over the top of the house, and it just became impossible to sleep. And I don't hear them so much anymore, but I just have memories of, as a kid, waking up in the morning to hear farmer. The farmer himself wasn't doing it, of course, but he contracted it out, so someone else would do it. But anyway, Sim Farm had a spray plane in it. Of course, I usually ended up crashing the thing most of the time. I don't know that I ever did figure out how to land the thing, but it would hold enough spray, you could spray all your fields at least, so usually by the time you could afford a plane, you had plenty of money, and so it wasn't that big a deal. I think you could also do animal husbandry in Sim Farm. So, what was the deal there? You had to have hay to feed them, like if you had cattle, and if you didn't feed them and water, I think you had to water them. If you didn't feed and water them regularly enough, the animals would get scared and they would balk and they would start beating up your property, meaning they would knock down your fences to try to get out so they could get feed. So you always had kind of a management issue, if you will, to make sure you you kept your animals fed. And at some point, I think you could sell them at a profit. So, I know I've talked at length about it here. Maybe some of you remember Sim Farm. There's some elements that it had, that I wish we had in Farming Sim. And we can get there maybe with a few mods here and there. And if you don't know what it is, you can look it up on the internet and you'll see. Shoot, the game is probably freeware out there by now. You can probably just pick it up for free. And you'll see the graphics are nothing like what we're enjoying in here. But back in the day, to a kid starving for any type of game related to agriculture, it really scratched an itch. And I think I would still play it just for kicks at some point. Although I don't think I could do a video on it. I don't think my video software would work with it. Or maybe it would. What do I know? And there were, over time, there were other farming type games. As I got out of high school, went into university, and then I discovered the internet. That's how old I am. We didn't have an internet until I went to college. So, never knew what an email was, and you could just go down the line of all the social media stuff. We didn't have it. So, but once you discovered the internet and realized you could search for anything on there, well, even look at my search terms. I started looking for farming game, all these things, and of course a lot of it pulled up, places to purchase the board game, the farming game, and all that. But I would scour the internet with some regularity, looking for a computer game or something related to agriculture, farming, that I could enjoy. I've always enjoyed the simulation genre, so there's been lots of business simulation games over time that I've had too. But farming ones, well, that and the railroad ones, I've always had a fondness for games involving trains and railroads too. Mostly farming stuff. And somewhere in there, let's see, who was it? Like I say, there was a couple other farm games that came out, nothing too worthy of mention. But then John Deere came out with their farming game, John Deere American Farmer, I think it was called. And I think we had a copy of that at home. I think by then I was married and out of the house. So I bought that on my own. And it was really good. It's kind of was a transition, if you will, from the era of the top-down, two-dimensional game, if you will, looking ahead to three-dimensional. Everything in here, of course, is three-dimensional. So the John Deere one was kind of the first, I think, where you kind of switched over to more realistic looking machinery and scenery and all that, and in a 3D type environment. And I think it had a couple versions. Maybe there was one called Drive Green. I didn't get all of them, but I got a couple of them as I recall. Another one through there that I discovered, which was still just the top-down variety, two-dimensional, that I kind of discovered by accident, and I still appreciated it because it was pretty realistic. It was called Stake Your Acres. And come to find out, it was produced by a company that sells accounting software for farmers. I'm trying to remember what it's called. They had several packages to help a farmer, do their bookwork. One of them was to record the field work that they did on their farms, so you could get a satellite picture of your farm, and you could click on the fields and say, okay, we plowed it today, we cultivated it today, whatever, and you would put in all your inputs, or if you sprayed it, you would say what tractor you used, what sprayer you used, how much you put on, what type of chemical, how much it cost, and it would tabulate field by field, just how much money you were making or losing. Another module of the software dealt with GPS technology, which was kind of in its infancy at the time, but you could take soil samples and draw yield maps, and you could, collect all that data there too. Well, kind of to sell their product, I think their software engineers made a really dumbed down version of their software and they turned it into a game. And they called it Stake Your Acres. So the user interface, you would go in there, they had a farm map, and it was advanced enough you could make your own farm map if you wanted to. So that was called early modding capability. Um, and you would be a farmer, so you would purchase tractors and combines and equipment and all this. Now you couldn't see them. That was one disadvantage of it. You couldn't see them anywhere. You had to use your imagination. But then you would run your farm kind of top down, and it had real costs and inputs in there. And this one had another feature which I thought was interesting. They put a factor in there for inflation, knowing that over time the farmer's costs tend to rise, but the price that he receives for the product doesn't always rise along with it. And so, as the longer you played the game, it tended to get tougher. And so, what do a lot of farmers do? When they feel that pinch, well, they start getting bigger. That's why they get bigger. They got to spread their costs over more acres to make it pay. So this kind of had to add it there. And maybe some of it is just down to my style of playing the game, which I've described before. Yes, I enjoy driving the tractors in here and hearing the sounds and seeing the bales produced and all that, but I also appreciate it from a business perspective. And it's you may hardly believe me, that negative number up there in the right hand corner is kind of taunting me as to how negative it is. But I appreciate the business aspect of it. So much so that even if you couldn't see the tractors, which we couldn't, like in this one game, Stake Your Acres, that didn't matter to me because in my mind I saw them. I had an equipment list, so I knew they existed. I just couldn't see a picture of them or whatever. I even set up an Excel spreadsheet to run the ad, and I had it dialed in. I was quite the corn and soybean farmer there for a while. I think the farm was Stake Your Acre algorithms were based on, it was a farm in Indiana, maybe, something like that. So I enjoyed that game too, and at some point, I know there was something called Sim Tractor, kind of just going through the history of ag farm games. And I look at the clock, I think my half hour is up already again. Man alive, the time flies. I never got Sim Tractor. I almost think the forum for it can still be found online. It was something that was kind of developed and pushed right before Farming Simulator came on the scene. And I think once Farming Simulator came into vogue, I mean, it just obliterated Sim Tractor. If you go and look at that, I think it was moddable. You can do a lot of things with it, but you look at the graphics and it's just hideous compared to what we're seeing here. It was just blocky graphics and colors and not nearly as nice, as what we see in here. But I never got that. I learned about that too late. For whatever reason, it never came up in my searches or whatever. And I honestly don't remember when we bought, I say we, because my wife and I bought Farming Sim '09. The intent was, we were gonna get a present for our boys for Christmas. And so I think I saw it in a store somewhere. Maybe I bought it online, I just don't remember. Well, I had no idea what I held in my hands with a farming simulator, and I even think I went so far as installing it on our home computer to make sure it would run it, which it did, and then I put it away. And for whatever reason, we decided maybe the boys were a little bit too young, that they wouldn't appreciate a game like that, or we had already enough gifts. I put it in a shoebox, and there it sat for several years. I mean, I'm just astounded to think about it. That all that time I could have been enjoying Farming Sim. And I wasn't because, just didn't know what we didn't know. So there it's at in a shoebox until, oh goodness, I think it was Christmas of 2014 when all of a sudden I remembered, it's like, oh yeah, we got this shoebox over here. Why don't we give it to our boys? Retrospect, it probably was best we waited a little bit longer. Um, so finally we gave it to them, and when I saw what my boys were playing, I was like, oh my goodness. It just opened a whole new world, even for their daddy, that's been pretty interesting for me ever since. So who knows what farming games may come in the future. I know there's cattle and crops that seem to kind of flop. There's been other farming games developed, whether pure farming, farming expert, pro farmer, I think is one out there. I haven't got any of those. To be honest, I'm pretty content, just with farming simulators. So I don't know that I'll look anywhere else for another game, unless it's so much better than this and is moddable. This is probably where it'll be. And who knows what they'll come up with in the future. Who knows? But I think I have gone over my time, so I think I'm going to call the episode there. Thank you once again for joining me and listening to me share a little bit and just kind of drone on and on as we continue making bales. So thanks for spending some time here. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in the next one. Take care till then. Bye-bye.